The world did not fall apart in a single day. It happened slowly, almost silently, like a crack spreading across a window pane. And most people did not notice it. They were too busy with their daily lives, too caught up in the noise around them, too distracted to see what was happening. But one person did notice. She had spent years studying human behavior, communication, and the invisible patterns that move people without them even realizing it. She worked quietly, often alone, watching how small actions created big changes over time. She had no desire for fame or attention. She preferred her simple routine, drinking tea while sitting in front of her old computer, scrolling through endless data, charts, and survey results. But something strange had started appearing in her research. At first, she thought her system was glitching. The spikes were too sharp, too sudden. People were becoming angrier at a speed she had never seen before. Even small disagreements turned into huge fights. Simple misunderstandings led to long arguments. Calm conversations changed into shouting matches for no clear reason. She tried to ignore it for a few days. After all, the world had always had problems. Stress, pressure, deadlines, maybe people were just tired. Maybe it was normal. But the numbers kept rising. And not just in one country. The pattern appeared everywhere. Different cultures, different languages, different lifestyles. Yet everyone seemed to be reacting the same way, with frustration, irritation, and impatience. She began digging deeper. She compared her findings with old records, looking for something similar in history. There were moments when people got more emotional during wars, during natural disasters, during economic crisis. But this time was different. There was no major event, no huge disaster, no world-changing crisis. Nothing big enough to explain why millions of people were acting as if they were constantly under attack. Her curiosity turned into concern. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong, and she could not sit quietly anymore. She typed a long report, explaining her findings in simple words so that anyone could understand. She sent it to different organizations and leaders, hoping someone would take it seriously. Days passed. No reply. She sent it again. And again. Finally, she received a short response from one office. It said, "Thank you. We will review it." That was it. No questions, no follow-up, no discussion. The message felt like a polite way of saying, "We don't have time for this." But she continued her work anyway, because the situation was getting worse. She watched as arguments online grew sharper. Families fought more. Neighbors got annoyed with each other over small things. People unfriended each other, blocked each other, stopped talking to each other. She read comments filled with anger, fear, and confusion. The world felt louder every day, even though no one was actually shouting in real life. She began traveling to different communities to observe things directly. In one city, a meeting about school rules turned into a heated debate within minutes. In another place, two drivers almost fought just because one of them honked twice. At a grocery store, a small misunderstanding over a queue almost turned into a scene. She kept watching, listening, and taking notes. Wherever she went, she saw the same pattern. People assumed the worst of each other. They reacted first and thought later. Their emotions rose faster than ever before. It was as if humanity had lost a layer of patience, a layer of calmness, a layer of understanding. She sat in a quiet cafe one evening, thinking about everything she had observed. The air smelled of coffee and warm bread, and soft music played in the background. Around her, people talked, laughed, worked, and scrolled on their phones. Nothing looked unusual on the surface. Life seemed normal. But she knew that something hidden had changed. She looked at the people sitting around. A young man frowning at his screen. Two friends arguing softly. A woman shaking her head repeatedly as she typed a message. No one seemed relaxed. No one seemed truly present. Every face showed a kind of invisible tension, the kind that slowly tightened the muscles without people realizing it. She asked herself a question she had been avoiding for weeks. What if the real danger was not something outside humanity, but something inside it? What if people themselves were unknowingly creating the problem? Something they used every day, something they depended on, something they did not see as harmful. That thought disturbed her. She closed her notebook, took a deep breath, and tried to calm her worries. Maybe she was exaggerating. Maybe she was reading too much into it. Maybe she needed rest. She left the cafe and walked outside. The evening sky was soft and clear. But even then, she saw people walking while staring at screens, reacting with quick emotions, shaking their heads, muttering under their breath. That night, she barely slept. Her mind kept repeating the same question. What was causing this? And why was it spreading so fast? The next morning, she woke up early, made a cup of tea, and sat at her desk again. She opened her laptop, searching for any clue she might have missed. She read articles, watched videos, and checked discussion forums. The same aggressive tone was everywhere. Anger over small things. Arguments over simple opinions. People attacking each other for reasons that made no sense. The more she explored, the more she realized something shocking. The real problem wasn't the issues people argued about. The real problem was the way people communicated. The speed. The constant noise. The never-ending stream of messages, posts, comments, reactions. Everything demanded instant response. No pause, no reflection, no calm. Humanity had invented the most powerful communication system in history. But instead of using it wisely, people were using it like a weapon without realizing it. Each angry word, each emotional reaction, each share of a half-understood message acted like fuel, spreading negativity faster than any wildfire dot. And the worst part was that no one noticed. People thought they were just expressing themselves. They didn't see how their behavior affected others. How one comment could create a chain reaction. How thousands of small emotional sparks could turn into a global storm. She leaned back in her chair, feeling a deep heaviness in her chest. It wasn't a physical pain. It was the weight of realization. She had found the source of the rising anger, the spreading frustration, the cracking of society. But it was not something she could turn off like a switch. It was something woven into daily life. Something everyone used. Something people relied on. She knew she had to warn the world again, but this time in a different way. If she made the message too technical, people would ignore it. If she made it too dramatic, people would think she was exaggerating. She needed to find a way to explain the danger in simple words. So she began writing again, slowly and carefully. She didn't write like a scientist this time. She wrote like a human speaking to another human. She described what she had seen, what she had learned, and why it mattered. She explained how small actions added up, how emotions spread, how reactions multiplied. She ended her message with a single line. If we continue like this, we might destroy more than we realize. She pressed send, hoping this time someone would pay attention, hoping someone would understand, hoping someone would listen before it was too late. She had no idea yet how big the problem truly was, or how far the damage had already spread, but she was about to find out. The message she sent out traveled far, but the reply she hoped for never came. Most people saw it, read a few lines, and scrolled past it. Some didn't understand it. Some didn't care. And a few even reacted with irritation, saying she was exaggerating the situation. It was painful to see her concerns treated like background noise. But she didn't stop. She kept studying the strange pattern it was spreading across the world. Over the next several weeks, the signs became clearer. The anger she saw earlier wasn't going away. It was growing stronger, like a slow fire that kept finding new fuel. Everywhere she looked, the same thing appeared: people reacting without thinking, speaking before understanding, judging before listening. One morning, she sat at her desk again, staring at her screen. She had a habit of observing online discussions for her research. But that day she noticed something new. A simple video had sparked thousands of arguments within an hour. It wasn't a harmful video. It was something ordinary. Yet the comment section looked like a battlefield. People were shouting at each other in words, pushing harsh opinions back and forth, writing lines filled with negativity. She took notes quietly, her fingers moving fast across the keyboard. She didn't judge them. She understood that humans reacted emotionally by nature. But she also knew this wasn't normal behavior. Something was amplifying their emotions. Something was turning small reactions into big explosions. Something invisible, something unintentional, something powerful. She opened another page, then another. The same pattern appeared. A simple news headline started fights. A photo made people argue about things they didn't even care about yesterday. A short text created conflict between people who had never met each other. It was like a chain reaction happening in real time. One person reacted quickly, without thinking. Another person saw that reaction and responded even more strongly. A third person joined in, then a fourth, and hundreds more. The emotional heat kept rising. She watched it as if she were watching a pot boil over. It struck her how strange it was. Humans had built advanced systems for communication, fast, global, and accessible. But instead of using them to understand each other, people were using them to attack each other, often without meaning to. She leaned back in her chair and whispered to herself, "This is the weapon. Not a gun. Not a bomb. Not anything physical. But attention, reaction, emotion." Humanity had created a tool so powerful that it could connect billions of people instantly. But they were using it carelessly, emotionally, aggressively. And that made it a weapon, an accidental weapon that everyone carried in their pocket. She felt a chill in her chest. Not because she was scared, but because she finally understood what she had been searching for. The dumbest weapon wasn't a machine. It wasn't technology itself. It was the way people used it. It was the way instant communication encouraged instant reaction. An instant reaction often meant reacting with emotion instead of reason. She wasn't angry at humanity. She didn't blame anyone. She knew people were simply overwhelmed, overstimulated, and unaware of how their behavior shaped the world. But she also knew that if nothing changed, things would only get worse. She decided to investigate the roots of the problem. The first step was to study how information traveled. So she created charts showing the path of a single message. She followed how one emotional sentence turned into hundreds of emotional responses. She traced how a small misunderstanding grew into large confusion. Her charts looked like spider webs, messy, tangled, spreading in all directions. Next, she checked how long it took for false information to reach thousands of people. She expected it to take hours. To her surprise, it took minutes, sometimes seconds. A quick reaction here, a fast share there, and suddenly, thousands of people believed something that wasn't even true. She watched as people argued over things that didn't even happen. They were fighting shadows, fighting illusions, fighting misunderstandings that could have been cleared if someone paused for a moment and checked the facts. She rubbed her forehead and sighed deeply. "People don't know what they're doing to each other," she whispered. "They don't even realize they're hurting themselves." She spent the next days reading psychological studies. Humans naturally responded to emotional triggers more quickly than logical ones. This wasn't new science. But the scale had changed. The triggers were everywhere now, flashing across screens all day. Every day, a person could wake up calm, open their device, and within minutes feel frustrated, anxious, or upset because of something they saw or read. One emotional ripple created 1,000 more. She traveled again to observe real-life behavior. In one town, she met a group discussing community issues. Within minutes, the discussion shifted from calm to tense, simply because someone mentioned a rumor they had seen online. The rumor wasn't true, but it didn't matter. It had already shaped their feelings. It had already changed their behavior. In another city, she witnessed strangers arguing loudly on a train platform. The argument started because one of them misunderstood a post they saw that morning. That single misunderstanding grew like a seed watered by emotion. By the time the two strangers met, they were already angry, even though neither of them had done anything wrong to each other. She realized something important. Humanity wasn't using a weapon intentionally. It was using it accidentally. Every time someone reacted too quickly, shared too fast, judged too early. The real weapon was impulsiveness. And the system people used every day made impulsiveness easy. She knew if she explained it like this, people might finally understand. They didn't need to feel guilty or ashamed. They just needed to be aware. So she started writing again. This time she prepared a detailed explanation, breaking it into simple examples. She showed how emotional posts traveled farther than calm ones. She explained how platforms encourage speed, not accuracy. She described how misleading information spread quicker because it triggered stronger feelings. But when she finished writing, she paused. She wondered if people would even read it. The world was full of noise already. Her message might become another drop in a loud ocean. She needed another approach. Something personal. Something people could relate to. Something human. That afternoon, she went for a long walk. She passed parks, shops, and quiet streets. She watched children playing, couples talking, elders sitting on benches. She loved people. She loved humanity. That was the only reason she worked so hard to warn them. At one point, she noticed a man sitting alone on a bench, scrolling his device with a frustrated expression. She walked past him, but then stopped. She turned back. Something inside her said she needed to talk to him. She approached with a gentle voice and asked, "Are you all right?" The man sighed heavily. "It's just, everything feels too loud," he said. "Every time I open my phone, I feel angry or stressed. It feels like the world is fighting all the time." She sat down beside him. "Do you think people are actually angrier? Or do you think we're just seeing more anger than before?" He looked at her with confusion. "I don't know. Maybe both." They talked for several minutes. And the more they talked, the more she realized he was experiencing exactly what her research had revealed. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't doing studies. He was just a normal person, feeling the effects of the emotional storms created by humanity's own reactions. She listened carefully, asking simple questions. And slowly, she saw something hopeful. He understood. He understood that he wasn't the only one feeling overwhelmed. He understood that reacting too fast made things worse. He understood that people needed to slow down. When she finally stood up to leave, he thanked her. He didn't know her work. He didn't know the research behind her words. But he understood the message on a human level. As she walked away, she felt a soft warmth in her chest. It wasn't victory. It wasn't relief. It was a feeling that maybe, just maybe, people were ready to understand if someone explained things simply. That night, she began rewriting everything again. Not as a scientist, not as a researcher, but as a human speaking to other humans. She didn't know it yet, but this simple change would shape everything that came next. The days that followed felt heavier than before. The researcher kept working quietly, but now she watched the world with a different kind of awareness. She no longer just studied the numbers or the charts. She watched people, their faces, their voices, their reactions. She noticed the small tensions that appeared between strangers. She noticed how fast conversations turned sharp. She noticed how people walked around with invisible stress resting on their shoulders. And it wasn't just online anymore. The emotional storms she had tracked on screens were spilling into real life. Everywhere she went, she saw cracks forming, small cracks, but growing ones. One morning, she visited a local community center to observe a discussion group. They were supposed to talk about simple neighborhood issues, the same topics they had handled calmly for years. But today, the mood was different. People entered the room with stiff shoulders and tired eyes, as if they had already argued with someone before arriving. The meeting began slowly. But as soon as someone mentioned a rumor they saw online, the entire room changed. People started talking over each other. Voices got louder. A few people stood up and paced back and forth, unable to sit still. None of them had confirmed whether the rumor was true. None of them even knew where it came from. But it didn't matter, the emotional spark had already caught fire. She watched in silence, taking notes. She didn't judge anyone. They were not bad people. They were just overwhelmed, overloaded, pulled into a storm without realizing it. After the meeting, she stepped outside and took a deep breath of cold air. The world looked peaceful, trees moving quietly in the wind, birds sitting on wires, sunlight touching the pavement. It was the exact opposite of what she had just witnessed indoors. And that contrast hurt her. It made her realize how deeply the invisible weapon had embedded itself in daily life. A few days later, she traveled to a larger city to observe another group. This one was bigger and included people from different backgrounds. When she walked into the hall, she noticed the tension in the air, even before anyone spoke. People sat stiffly, checking their devices again and again. She could see their expressions change with every new message they read: frustration, fear, disbelief, irritation. It was as if people were carrying the entire world's problems in their pockets. When the discussion began, it took less than 5 minutes for a disagreement to break out. A simple topic, something harmless, turned into a loud argument. One person accused another of believing nonsense. Someone else raised their voice in frustration. Another participant muttered something under their breath, which made someone else angry. She noticed how fast emotion spread. One angry comment led to another. One misunderstanding grew into a conflict. The room felt like a pot boiling over, and she could almost see the emotional heat rising. When the meeting ended, she stayed behind for a while. The hall slowly emptied, but she remained seated, staring at the chairs, the floor, the fading echoes of raised voices. She whispered softly, "This is getting worse faster than I expected." For the rest of the day, she walked through the city observing people around her. In a park, she saw two friends arguing about something they had both read online. Nearby, a couple sat on a bench, both staring at their screens, their faces tense. They weren't fighting each other. They were both reacting to something happening somewhere else. She passed a cafe where customers were discussing a trending post. They didn't know the people involved. They weren't personally affected. Yet their emotions were intense, as if the situation had happened to them directly. She realized something important. Humans were not emotionally designed for constant global exposure. In the past, people dealt with their own small circles, family, neighbors, coworkers. But now they were absorbing the emotions of millions of strangers every day. Their hearts were overwhelmed, stretched too thin to handle the constant emotional weight. That night, she returned to her small apartment and sat in front of her computer once more. She scrolled through news headlines and saw how stories were written in ways that triggered instant reactions. She read comment sections filled with anger, even on posts that didn't deserve any anger at all. At one point, she closed her eyes and rubbed her face. She felt exhausted, not from the work, but from the emotional atmosphere surrounding everything. It was like trying to breathe in a room filled with invisible smoke. She opened a notebook and wrote a single line. Humanity is reacting faster than it is thinking. She paused for a moment, then added another line beneath it. And fast reactions make people easy to control. This thought scared her. Not because someone was intentionally controlling people, but because emotional reactions controlled people without anyone needing to try. The next morning, she visited a school to observe how young people behaved. She noticed something heartbreaking. Even teenagers looked tired. Not physically tired, but mentally drained. Many of them walked through the halls, scrolling their devices, reacting to things within seconds. A simple comment from a friend could change their mood the entire day. A random post could make them feel insecure. A short video could fill them with anger toward someone they had never met. She talked to a teacher after class. The teacher said, "I don't know what's happening, but everyone seems more tense lately. Even small issues make them upset. I don't remember students being like this before." The researcher listened quietly, nodding. She didn't reveal her studies. She didn't want to sound dramatic. But inside, she felt the weight of confirmation. The emotional wave wasn't just affecting adults, it was affecting the next generation too. Later that evening, she visited a quiet town on the edge of the countryside. She hoped to find calmness there, expecting rural areas to be less influenced by fast communication. But even there, she saw signs of emotional pressure. Two neighbors argued intensely about a news headline neither of them fully understood. A small shop owner complained that customers were becoming more impatient. She realized there was no escape from the trend. The emotional storm had reached every corner of the world. The next day, she sat in a small bus station, waiting for her ride. She watched people around her, some scrolling on their phones, some whispering to each other, some staring blankly into the distance. No one looked relaxed. No one looked at peace. It was as if everyone carried an invisible burden they didn't know how to put down. A young girl nearby began crying softly after reading something on her screen. Her mother tried to comfort her, asking what happened. The girl just shook her head and whispered, "Everyone is being mean." The researcher's heart tightened. This wasn't just a pattern anymore. It was a global emotional crisis. On the bus ride home, she stared out the window, watching the passing fields and fading light. She felt a mixture of sadness and determination. She knew the problem wasn't impossible to solve. But first, people needed to understand what they were doing, how their quick reactions were hurting not only others, but themselves. When she reached home, she sat at her desk again. The room was quiet, but her mind was racing. She opened her laptop and began writing everything she had observed, the spreading conflicts, the rising emotional heat, the cracks forming between communities. She wrote about people arguing before knowing the facts, about families avoiding conversations because they were afraid of conflict, about strangers fighting online without remembering that they were human beings talking to other human beings. As she typed, her message grew clearer and clearer. Humanity wasn't in danger because of an outside enemy. It was in danger because of its own reactions. People were letting their emotions guide their actions before their minds could catch up. And every quick reaction became fuel for the next emotional fire. She stopped writing for a moment and looked around her quiet room. She whispered to herself, "If I want the world to hear this, I need to show them the truth in a way they can feel it." She wasn't sure how to do that yet, but she knew she would find a way, because now she understood just how close humanity was to harming itself without even realizing it. She realized that simply observing was no longer enough. The signs were everywhere, growing stronger each day. The world was moving faster than people could think. Every argument online, every angry post, every rushed reaction was a small spark that ignited larger flames. She knew that if humanity didn't become aware of what it was doing, the consequences could be far worse than anyone realized. She decided it was time to act. But the question was how? How do you warn millions of people who are already overwhelmed with information? How do you convince them that the way they were living, the way they were reacting every day, could be dangerous? She knew it couldn't be through numbers and charts alone. People didn't connect with statistics. They connected with stories, with feelings, with small examples they could relate to. She began by assembling a small team. Not scientists or government officials, but people who understood human behavior in different ways. A psychologist who studied stress and anger. A data analyst who could track patterns without being overwhelmed by them. A communication expert who knew how messages spread and how they could be made meaningful. They met in a quiet apartment filled with books, laptops, and stacks of papers. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. The first challenge was showing people how they were being affected. It wasn't easy. People didn't believe it. They thought they were fine. They thought their reactions were normal. But the team had evidence. They tracked the spread of false messages, the speed at which emotional posts traveled, and the impact it had on communities. They created simple, easy-to-understand examples, showing how a single post could trigger multiple arguments, misunderstandings, and stress in just minutes. They started with small experiments. They asked volunteers to read certain posts online and then report how they felt. Anger, anxiety, frustration, even sadness, all were heightened in people who were exposed to emotional triggers. Then they compared it with people who were given the same information in a calm, measured way. The difference was shocking. The calm group thought clearly, discussed calmly, and didn't let their emotions control them. The first group was quick to react, slow to think, and more likely to argue. The results were clear. People's emotions were being manipulated not by a person, but by the way information was designed and delivered. It was a weapon without a name, a weapon that everyone carried unknowingly, a weapon they were using against themselves and each other. The next step was sharing these findings with the world. But she knew that a direct approach wouldn't work. People didn't like to hear they were wrong. They didn't want to be told they were being manipulated. She needed something different, something subtle, something relatable, something human. They decided to start small. They created short stories, short videos, and examples showing everyday situations. One video showed two friends arguing over a misunderstanding caused by a single post. Another story followed a family whose dinner turned tense because of something someone read online. These stories didn't accuse anyone. They simply showed the consequences of emotional reactions and hasty judgments. When they shared the first stories online, the response was mixed. Some people ignored it. Some scrolled past. But some paused. Some shared it with others. And slowly, the idea began to spread not as a lecture, but as a gentle nudge for awareness. The researcher realized that awareness alone wasn't enough. People needed tools, strategies, ways to control their reactions before they spread. The team worked on simple steps anyone could follow. Pause before reacting. Ask if the information is true. Think about how words can affect others. Take a moment to breathe. Reflect. Respond, not react. These steps were simple, almost obvious, but powerful. When people practiced them, they noticed a difference. They argued less. They listened more. Their stress decreased. And they began to share these strategies with others. But change was slow. Millions of people were already caught in the storm. Patterns of anger, frustration, and impulsive reactions were deep-rooted. She knew that a single person's effort wouldn't be enough. That was why her team focused on community, on connecting people, who could influence their own circles. They believed that small ripples could eventually become waves of calm, understanding, and awareness. In one city, she attended a community meeting where she explained these ideas. She didn't speak like a scientist. She spoke like a human, sharing stories of everyday life, showing simple ways to pause and think. People listened. Some nodded. Some smiled. Some seemed unsure. But the seed had been planted. That was enough. As days passed, the team refined their approach. They realized that urgency needed to be balanced with hope. People needed to know there was a problem, but also that they could fix it. Fear alone wouldn't work. Anger alone wouldn't work. Understanding, connection, and empathy were the tools they needed to teach. The researcher spent long nights writing guides and stories. She revised them again and again, making sure the language was simple and natural. She wanted anyone, anywhere, to read it and feel that they could make a difference. She wanted people to see that their actions mattered, that a single pause before reacting could change the course of a conversation, a community, or even a town. Slowly, the message started to reach more people. People shared it with their friends and families. Some schools incorporated it into lessons about communication and emotional awareness. Small groups held discussions, practicing the simple strategies her team had developed. They learned to stop before reacting, to consider the feelings of others, to verify information before spreading it. The researcher watched with cautious optimism. The storm was not gone, but small pockets of calm were beginning to appear. People were learning that their own reactions could be controlled, that they didn't have to let the invisible weapon rule their lives. She knew that change would take time. Humanity was not used to stopping and reflecting in the middle of a fast-moving world. But she also knew it was possible. Awareness could grow. Habits could change. One person, one story, one pause at a time. The emotional storm could be tamed. She thought about the people she had met along the way, the man on the bench, the young girl in the bus station, the community members in towns and cities. Each one represented hope. Each one was proof that humanity could learn to use its power responsibly. As she sat alone one evening, staring at the soft glow of her computer screen, she felt a quiet sense of determination. The work was far from over. Millions of people still needed guidance. Millions still reacted without thinking. But she had seen enough to believe that change was possible. If only people were willing to try. The invisible weapon of emotion and reaction could still destroy communities, divide families, and harm the next generation. But it could also be disarmed. Slowly, carefully, thoughtfully. Humanity had a choice, and she knew that the choice was theirs to make. The world had reached a turning point, but most people didn't even notice it yet. Life continued at its usual pace, with busy streets, crowded offices, and endless streams of information flowing through screens. But beneath the surface, things were shifting. A few people had started paying attention to the way they reacted, the way they responded, the way they shared their thoughts. And that small change, almost invisible, was the beginning of something larger. The researcher spent her mornings observing, just like she had always done. She traveled to cities, towns, and even remote villages, watching how people interacted. The difference was subtle, but it was there. Conversations that used to end in shouting now ended with pauses, with questions, with moments of thought. People were starting to notice the impact of their words before they even spoke them. She visited a small cafe in a quiet town. Two strangers sat near each other, both scrolling through their devices. She noticed the tension in their faces, but also something new. One of them paused before reacting to a post, took a deep breath, and then smiled at something the other had said. They exchanged a few words calmly, and the earlier tension dissolved. It was a small scene, almost insignificant, but to her it was powerful. People were learning to pause. People were learning that they had control over their reactions. Back in the city, she observed a community center where a local discussion group met. The atmosphere was different from her previous visits. People listened to each other more carefully. When disagreements arose, they took a moment to ask questions, to clarify, to understand. The emotional heat was still there, but it no longer controlled the room. The group practiced empathy, even when it was difficult. She realized that change didn't happen all at once. It happened step by step, conversation by conversation, day by day. She remembered the lessons from her research. One post, one comment, one reaction could start a chain of negativity. But the same principle applied in reverse. One thoughtful pause, one careful word, one moment of understanding could also create a positive chain. And that was what she now witnessed in small pockets across the world. She met a teacher who had begun introducing simple strategies to her students. She asked students to take a moment before reacting to messages online. She asked them to consider how their words might affect others. The teacher reported that conflicts in the classroom had decreased. Students were calmer, more reflective, and more patient with each other. The researcher felt a wave of hope. The next generation was learning something crucial, something adults had to rediscover. Even online, she noticed subtle shifts. Social media posts that once provoked instant outrage now prompted discussion, questioning, and curiosity. People began checking facts before sharing. They began thinking about tone, about clarity, about the effect of their words. The invisible weapon of impulsive reaction still existed, but it was losing its power in certain places. Because people were becoming aware of it. She visited a town hall meeting one evening. The room was full of residents discussing local issues. The atmosphere was calm yet engaged. People asked questions without shouting. They debated without attacking. They listened as much as they spoke. She realized that the lessons her team had been spreading, pausing, reflecting, understanding, were taking root. Change was slow, but it was real. She thought about the people she had met over the years. The man on the bench who had felt overwhelmed. The young girl on the bus. The community groups struggling with arguments. The students learning to pause. All of them represented hope. All of them showed that humanity could choose a better way, even in a world filled with noise and emotional overload. At night, she sat alone at her desk, looking at the soft glow of her computer. She reflected on the journey she had taken. The world was not perfect. There were still arguments, still misunderstandings, still moments of anger and frustration. But the patterns were changing. The speed of emotional reactions was slowing, just enough for people to think before they acted. Awareness was growing, and with awareness came responsibility. She realized that the weapon had not disappeared. It could never disappear entirely. Humans were emotional beings, and fast communication would always exist. But the weapon could be disarmed, slowly, thoughtfully, through conscious effort. Every pause, every kind word, every moment of reflection weakened its power. Every person who learned to control their reactions became a part of a growing chain of calm and understanding. She remembered the first time she had realized the danger, how invisible and powerful it was. And now she saw the other side, the potential for humanity to take responsibility, to guide its own actions, to heal itself. The realization filled her with a quiet sense of peace. Humanity had created the dumbest weapon, yes, but humanity also had the capacity to choose its use wisely. The next morning, she walked through a quiet park. Children played, parents watched, and a gentle wind moved through the trees. People smiled at one another. Some chatted calmly. Others paused to help someone with a task or a question. It was nothing dramatic, nothing flashy, but it was meaningful. It was evidence that change, even small change, could ripple outward in ways she had once only imagined. she thought about the choices each person had. Every reaction was a decision. Every word was a chance to build or to break. Every post, every message, every conversation could either feed the storm or calm it. Humanity had the choice, and the choice was happening every day, in countless small actions that often went unnoticed, and she knew that hope depended on people remembering that. Not just thinking about it once, but practicing it constantly. Not just understanding, but acting with intention. Not just pausing for themselves, but pausing for each other. As she sat on a bench, watching the sunlight fall across the park, she realized that the work was far from over. The storm was not completely gone. There would be setbacks, moments of frustration, waves of anger that might rise again. But the difference now was that people could see it, understand it, and respond differently. They could pause, think, and choose. And that choice was powerful. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because the world was perfect, not because every person was calm or kind, but because humanity had begun to recognize its own power, the power to create, to destroy, and now the power to change. She stood up and walked slowly, taking in the sights and sounds around her. People were living their lives, carrying their routines, their worries, their joys. And within that ordinary life, subtle changes were taking root. Conversations were calmer. Reactions were measured. Awareness was growing. Humanity was learning to disarm the weapon it had created, and she understood, finally, that the future would not be determined by technology, by news, or by outside forces. The future would be determined by people, their choices, their actions, their moments of reflection. Every single person had the ability to make a difference. She smiled quietly to herself, feeling a sense of calm she had not known in months. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, she believed it could be successful. Humanity had faced the dumbest weapon it had ever created. And now, humanity had a chance to choose wisely. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park. People walked home, children laughed, and a gentle wind rustled the leaves. And somewhere in that quiet, ordinary moment, hope lived. The researcher took a deep breath and whispered softly, "It's in their hands now. They can choose. They really can." And with that, she knew her work had a purpose, showing the world not only the danger, but the possibility. Showing that every human being could make a choice, and that every choice mattered. Humanity had created the dumbest weapon, but it had also created the power to disarm it. One pause, one thought, one kind action at a time. And that, she realized, was the most important lesson of all.